All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Alex Hughes. I am the secretary for the Lafayette Alliance, and I am excited about tonight's presentation. It is the finale of the 2021 speaker series and the inaugural speaker series at that. So we are excited to have Dr. Linda McMullen with us. But before we begin tonight, I do want to go through a few slides here. You should see on your screens here the statue at Lafayette Square in Lagrange, Georgia. And I want to also share with you the new LED lights have been installed at Lafayette Square. And if you are in the local area or coming by this way anytime soon, I highly recommend stopping and seeing those lights at night. They're quite impressive and add an element to Lafayette Square. Also want to mention that Lafayette Day Video 2021 was released on September 6th, and so this past Sunday. And if you haven't seen that, I would highly recommend it. We teamed once again this year with the City of LaGrange and LGTV, both Philip Sledge and Adam Spees there at the city. And so you can view that at www.lafayettelagrange.org/Lafayette Day 2021. Also, the picture there is of the wreath that was laid on Sunday at this statue. I do want to again mention, and we've sent this out through email blast and through our website, the 2022 speaker series has been announced. You can now go to our website, LafayetteLagrange.org, and view the events tab, or go to LafayetteLagrange.org/2022 speaker series to see all of the speakers and register for their events. We're excited about next year and want you to go and view all of that and be excited with us. I also want to mention that work is underway. We are in the trenches currently creating a Lafayette online store. And just to give you a quick preview here, and I do have to say it is a draft. You will see several products that we will have here, although these are not exactly the product photos you'll see when the store launches. But we do have that a way of giving membership. Lafayette prints, Lafayette note cards, and coffee mugs will be soon available, and we are adding merchandise as we go along in the months. You can, of course, visit us at LafayetteLagrange.org or on one of these or 5 different social media accounts now. I do want to mention that since the last speaker series, we have added Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, so you can view us on all of those. We are on every social media platform I think that matters at this point. So view us on those, and we'll be excited to engage with you there. We also want to invite you, if you'd like to support the Lafayette Alliance, you can join our membership by going to LafayetteLagrange.org/contact us, or emailing me at alex@LafayetteLagrange.org. With that, I will give no further ado, and I will turn this over just here in a moment, once I can get my technical things going, to both Dr. McMullen and Dr. Ingram to take us away for the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Alex. For those of you who may have tapped in tardy, here's the prologue. Dr. Linda McMullen is chair of the business department of Lagrange College, and she is our guest this evening, and I have been looking forward to talking with her. We are in Lagrange, Georgia, right here on the Alabama line, about an hour south of Atlanta, population 30,000. And in the center of town, there is a magnificent statue of the Marquis de Lafayette, General Lafayette, he prefers. That statue is owned by Lagrange College on permanent loan to the city. Lagrange College, Dr. McMullen, is a seminal part of this community. How about giving us just a little summary about Lagrange College before we launch into Lafayette?
Okay, well, Lagrange College is owned by the North Georgia Conference of the United Methodist Church. We are a liberal arts and sciences institution, which means that in addition to all the majors that we offer, we pride ourselves on offering a good broad-based education. The original meaning of liberally educated meant across a lot of subjects, not just discipline specific for the major. We are a close-knit community. Students come primarily from Georgia, but also from neighboring states and some quite a ways. We have a student with us from Ireland this year as well. And we have a faculty and staff that are very involved in the community and serve on a number of boards and lend their expertise when asked. And the other thing I'm proud of for the college is we have a servant scholar program. The director is Jeff Lucan. And those are students who are carefully selected and spend the last 2 years of their undergraduate years together in the Broad Street departments, learning about servant leadership, what it means, how you do it, and how they can affect the difference in this community. So that's the college. And I feel comfortable talking about our attributes because I've been here now for 22 years. So I don't feel like a stranger anymore. This is my home.
So let's launch into Lafayette. So Lafayette's life has a number of chapters, many of them. Which chapter is most compelling to you and you find most interesting?
I think two chapters, actually. When he was young, he wrote in 1777 that he was poor. He was born into poverty, but then because of deaths in the family, he became rich. And he had a childhood that kind of reads like a romance novel at times, or like a very difficult story at times. He lost his father. His father never saw him. He lost his mother. He lost his grandfather. But there was a spirit about him, and that's what attracts me for the first part of his story. I read a story about him chasing a beast. There was at the time what people now say was probably a wolf, or even maybe more than one wolf, that was killing people, killed about 100 people over a 3-year period and wounded about 300 more. But the stories about this animal got bigger and bigger and bigger until you really couldn't tell what kind of animal he was. Lafayette, as an 8-year-old, instead of being nervous, went out on walks to try and find him so that he could kill him. And so that bravery in that, and the fact that he was incensed when the local paper wrote about another person named Lafayette, who said that he encountered this animal and was afraid. And Lafayette was so upset that he wrote a letter to the publisher. His family would not let him mail it, but he wrote a letter because he wanted to say, that's not me, that was somebody else, I'm not afraid. So that, let me see a little bit of insight into the type of person he was. And then later on in this early period, when he went to school, after his family had died and he had relocated to Paris, he was in school and he was given an assignment by his English teacher to write about the perfect horse. And I liked that. It taught me a little bit about him as well, because he wrote about a horse that reared up and threw his rider off to the ground. And I don't know whether he was writing it from the vein of he had so many rules and restrictions and constraints where he was then, but that's why he did that, or whether that was the beginning perhaps of a bigger vision of getting rid of the constraints and the things that would hold people down. And so I liked that. So I have those things from the early period. And then the other period is when he did his farewell tour. I've been reading a lot about the farewell tour and trying to wrap my head around a person who came back and went to so many cities over a year, and every place he went, he had parades and dinners, and veterans would come out and want to shake his hand, and they were crying. They did musicals in his honor. They had all kinds of flasks and prints and cups and everything, and it was the same in every city that he went to. So it makes me appreciate what kind of a person he must have been, because he wasn't a citizen. Well, he called himself an adopted son of the United States, but his citizenship was in France, and yet he had worked so diligently in the war, which assignment he took basically like what we would call at the college an intern, because he accepted the commission and said, I don't need to take any pay. But he had done such a fantastic job that people really revered and admired him. And so the more I read about what happened in every city that he went to, the more of an understanding I got about him really being a national hero, not just attached to any one place, but of the 24 states, every state did the same thing. And so those are the two things I think that resonate with me the most, is his early life. And then when he came back, he would have been, I believe, 66, whenever he came on his farewell tour. And the feelings for him and support for him were very, very strong. And that was very interesting to me.
So you have informed yourself about Lafayette. How did you go about doing that?
I like the types of books that read like stories because I'm a teacher and I tell stories. And so I looked not so much for the books that listed all the dates as when he did things, but that told the stories of how he engaged with other people, about his marriage, about how he really came to love and respect Washington and how that feeling was returned. I look for books like that. There's one book that I have enjoyed that's told with a sense of humor. It's called Lafayette in the Somewhat United States. And it's a really good book written by Sarah Vowell that shares information about things that he encountered at every step along the way. So I basically have a list of books that I'm going through, taking my time and learning more and more about him so that I can represent it fairly if I get asked questions. At some point, I'll feel very comfortable that I know enough about his entire span. I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it.
So his grandmother, Marie Catherine, told him stories about his family fighting alongside Joan of Arc, about his father at the Battle of Menden, and about courage and character. What role do you think those stories played in Lafayette's outlook?
Oh, I think it was huge, and it was the stories, but it was also his knowledge of the fact that all the men in his family had served honorably in the army serving the king. And I think he had a sense of duty very early that never left him. I think it also helped him develop. A number of the stories talk about the fact that he was seeking glory. I don't think it was meant in a vain sense, but the idea that when you are a soldier, you do serve and you want to bring glory to the party that you are serving. I think it's in that sense that he saw it. And I think it comes into play in two ways. First, how disillusioned he was whenever they made some changes. Louis XVI made some changes, and he appointed a minister of war that in essence knocked out a whole line of people who would have been in active service. And Lafayette was one of them, because this minister did not think that people who were mid-level officers but had not any field experience of note should be in those positions. So he was knocked down to the reserves. That was disappointing to him. So I think he saw an opportunity, apart from the fact that he knew what the British had done, that his father had been killed in Menden because of that 7-year war. I think there was an idea that he could come and serve honorably in active service. So as he heard the stories, he was at a dinner with a Duke of Gloucester who told about what was going on over across the pond. And he heard that. And I think it captured his attention. And he, after that, met with Silas Deane and others and found his way to get over there. And I think that sense of duty is what kept him, even when things didn't look good, when he got up after he was wounded and got right back in the thick of things, when he was loyal to Washington, when for a time others were not, and when he was disappointed because in some cases, people who had been appointed to officers in the colonies didn't have the same ethic that he did. And he writes in some of his letters that they weren't very disciplined. Sometimes they would desert in the face of battle. I think that sense of duty is what kept him staying there. And it's one of the things Washington appreciated about him. And there was an occasion, I believe it was the Battle of Albany, where he was feeling really despondent because they had not responded in the way he thought. And he said, we don't have enough clothes, we don't have uniforms, we're weak, no matter how you look at it. And he was afraid people would be disappointed in him. And Washington wrote in a very fatherly way and said, it's okay, relax, you're doing what you're supposed to do. So I think everything that drove him, starting from those early stories, came from his understanding that he had a duty to fulfill.
So Lafayette scholar Louis Gottschalk, University of Chicago, said that Lafayette came to America because of adolescent angst, that he was dissatisfied and running away. On the other hand, Stanley Atzerda, Cornell University, said, no, it was because of character that Lafayette came to America. Which argument do you find compelling and why?
The character argument, because I don't think that teenage angst would have kept him the way it did. Now, yes, he was absolutely upset with the way people were holding him back in France with his father-in-law and others, and he did not appreciate those constraints. But I think he identified with what the colonists were trying to do, and he wanted to be a part of that revolution to help them earn their freedom. He was not in favor of a total aristocracy. He very early on started talking about democracy, democratic principles. And if I have my dates right, before he came to America the first time, he was already a member of the Freemasons. And so this idea of honor and duty and egalitarian environment were already in his head. So I think it's probably not a fair argument to say it was just teenage angst. I think there was planning. He thought he could make a difference and that he wanted to do that.
So learning Lafayette is a work of discovery. What did you find out that surprised you?
I think that it may be, I don't want to be unfair, maybe because of the times in which he was raised, but he felt so strongly about equality. And yet the only example I could find of where he really acted on it with regard to the race issue at the time was when he bought a plantation in the capital city of French Guiana. And he did that deliberately so he could free the enslaved peoples. Now, he didn't free them right away. He did start paying them right away. And he educated them. And he dictated that if punishments were given, the punishments had to be the same for the enslaved peoples as they would have been for the white people. And his wife actually ran it. Adrienne actually ran that plantation and those changes. So he did then act in a way that says, this is what I believe. And I don't know if it's because he wasn't a citizen or whether he thought he had to tread carefully, but I kept waiting for a little more boldness in terms of the situation that we were in here with the enslaved people. Now, I know he talked to Washington on more than one occasion, to Jefferson and to Monroe, I believe, to try and convince them that slavery was the wrong thing to do. He even offered to share a plot of land with George Washington on which they would both work with the people who had formerly been enslaved. And his idea was, don't enslave them, give them fair wages for their work. Nothing came of that. So I feel that his character was such that he knew it was wrong and he knew a change needed to be made. But I couldn't find any instances of real action. And that may be an unfair critique, but as I read it, I kept thinking, if he had pushed a little bit more, or if he had done something in the States like he did in French Guiana, might that have made a difference? I don't know that it would, but that's one of the things that struck me as I read was, I feel like the ethic is there, but more action, perhaps others might have picked up had there been more action.
So let's drill down on relevance. In your mind, what relevance does Lafayette and his story have to the Black community?
I think it's the fact that most of us probably never would have thought of Lafayette as a person who was even concerned in any way with the rights of enslaved peoples when he was here in 1776. I think it's relevant because the things that, the values that he espoused are values that matter to all of us. The fact that he thought an honorable democracy would not enslave people. And then when he wrote, I don't remember the year at the moment, I want to say 1789, but when he wrote for the National Assembly in France, he talked about the one thing that would cause a citizenship to fail. And part of that was the way that they treated their citizens. And if they didn't give everybody equal rights. So that was clearly part of his center, was that everyone should have equal rights. So I think it's relevant. And I think it's also the fact that, like so much of history, you read bits and pieces and you don't know the whole story. When I first came to Lagrange, I don't know that I would have paid any attention to the statue. And when I first heard about the Lafayette Alliance, I didn't think that much of it because it seemed to me this is a person whose mission is far removed from the things that I normally get involved with. And so I had to do some reading and learn. No, that's not the case. What he teaches is relevant for us today.
Simone Bolivar admired Lafayette. On the same note, what relevance does Lafayette have, in your mind's eye, for the Hispanic community?
I think it's the same for any of the communities, because he didn't just talk about African Americans. When I think about him, and I think about his appreciation of diversity, and in some ways moving toward inclusion at a time when that really wasn't even in the vocabulary, because you read about him in conversations learning about the Native American populations, about women, about freedom of religion, religious tolerance. So I think he speaks to the Hispanics and to every other culture. It's that people who are marginalized, underrepresented, without a voice, his preference would have been that in a democracy, those voices would all be heard.
Lafayette never set foot in Montana. Why should the people in Montana care about Lafayette?
I think it's the idea that we say we are the United States, and a community, what should be a community, doesn't have boundaries that stop at the state lines. And so the same idea that he talked about when he was in New York or in Boston would have relevance in Montana or any other place. We live in community with each other, and we should have enough respect for each other that we want people to have the same rights and privileges that we do. And we were founded on a Christian Judeo tradition, which is treat others as you would have, as you would want to be treated. I think it's that. He never used those exact words, but I think that's where the relevance is, that the message is a broad one. It's not limited to specific states, and it's not limited to the former slave-holding states. It's a message that should resonate nationally.
You are working on some Lafayette sketches. Tell me about that.
We're trying to present in short 2 or 3 minute sketches, vignettes that tell little things about Lafayette. So for instance, we might do something where we share part of the speech that he gave. He was the first foreign person to be invited to give a speech at Congress. There's some meaty words in there that we might want to use. I would like to do a little bit of humor in some of these sketches. His name is 10 feet long. So if we go to do sketches for little kids, I would like to use that name somehow, someone who could write it. It's not me, it's someone who could write that and talk about that. I think it would be helpful to do some sketches that talk about how he handled dissension. And the one example I'm thinking of, I haven't started working on this one yet, but the one I have been thinking of is when he was touring for his farewell tour. The country was in the heat of an election. That was a very difficult election, and people were very strongly for one side or the other side. And he wrote in one of his letters that he saw himself as a reconciler, that because people were coming to see him, people on both sides of the aisle, there are actually 4 candidates in that race, if I recall, but people on both sides of the aisle could come and enjoy an evening with him and forget their issues, their political issues. And he asked a few people, what are you going to do? He said, and he actually said, I was flabbergasted when I saw this. He said to a group, what are you going to do? Are you going to lay siege to the Capitol? And their response was, no, whoever wins will win. And that will be the lawfully elected person, but we're going to keep our eye out so that if that person doesn't do what he's supposed to do, we have some recourse. And what that interested me in terms of the way he approached the issue of dissension. And when he went to a reception where Andrew Jackson was there, even though he had lost the election, he was warmly received and there weren't any issues. It was a different time, but the political heat was there as much as it is now. The response was a little different, but it was there. And I enjoyed reading about how he saw himself as a person who could reconcile and bring folks together.
Lafayette was given honorary degrees, Harvard, Princeton, 2 from the University of Pennsylvania. Is there a case in your mind's eye for an honorary degree from the illustrious Lagrange College?
Now you put me on a spot with that one. My guess is, my belief is, at least since I've only been here, we don't do any posthumous degrees. It's only for people who can come and stand at the podium and talk to us a little bit. Had he was in Georgia, he was very much appreciated in Georgia. There certainly was an opportunity in those days for him to have gotten that degree. I did read that every college that he went to, Columbia and Harvard, every place, rolled out the red carpet and really understood how much he had contributed. So it would have been something that would bode well for the college had that happened back in that time.
A very tactful reply, I might add. Well done. So Lagrange, Georgia, it's not home to Lafayette artifacts and memorabilia. So how can Lagrange claim to be a home for Lafayette without that brick and mortar?
I don't think that it's needed. I mean, our name, the name of our city, speaks to how much Lagrange thought of him, because it's named after his family's chateau, Lagrange. I think the way we lay claim is the way we act toward each other. The Alliance, if you think about what the Alliance is doing and that we are inspiring and illuminating, educating, that's something that we can all use as our center point. So I think the way we help him have a more prominent place here is that we work in partnership with other organizations that are interested and that are committed to diversity and inclusion and basic education about our history. And I think that's how you do it. I do hope at some point, Alex talked about the store. We are going to have some things that we can give when people come through here, but I think people will come and hear the story and understand that he was here. And I think they will appreciate that.
So when you first arrived in Lagrange and you saw this 1,600-pound, 10-foot statue of Lafayette in the center of town, what was your initial impression?
I didn't think much about it, except I wondered why it was sitting there right in the center of town, because there weren't any other statues that I could see. And nobody, at least in the circles that I ran in, nobody talked about it. So it was just a statue that was there on a nice grassy area in the center of the city. And I really didn't think that much about it. And it was some time before I really thought about it and realized what he had contributed. The fact that, as you mentioned, that the college gave the statue or donated the statue in perpetuity to the city of Lagrange. Until that point, I hadn't really thought about the statue or the man that much.
So statues represent ideas. In your mind's eye, summarize the ideas that statue of Lafayette represent.
I think it represents how we should think about democracy, because he talked about that a lot. Now, he didn't live in a democracy in France, but he understood the concept of democracy. And in a democracy, all voices need to be heard, and all voices have equal value. When he was here on a farewell tour, in many cities, he was hosted by the Society of Cincinnati. And I had to read about that to see what that was. And he had, even though they hosted him, he had an underlying problem with that group, because to be a member, you had to have someone who was in the American Revolution. And he did not approve of what he called hereditary membership organizations. So he joined. He had been advised to join, and he did. But even that grated at him. He didn't like those types of distinctions. And, on some level, that sounds unusual, because certainly where he grew up, he had people who were subservient to him, and that's the way it was. And they were ruled by a king, absolute ruler. And yet there was an underpinning that that's not the way he thought things ought to be.
So Lagrange and the Lafayette Alliance will host the annual meeting of the American Friends of Lafayette in June 2023, 2 years. Tentatively, what should AFL members expect, and why should they save the date?
Oh, absolutely. I think they should expect a really exciting several days here in the city. You know, Lagrange is a very interesting, we are a unique city anyway, in terms of what we offer, what we have done, the programs we're able to put on. But when people come here for that particular program, they're going to get an in-depth portrait of Lafayette at several points in his life in a way that is very well done, but that's going to be fun. I'm anticipating that as they watch sketches, listen to reenactors, enjoy the food, they're going to be glad that they're here in this city. And I think because of the way we are designing it, that unless they are deep scholars of Lafayette, they're going to get information here that they're not going to get just from casual reading, that they won't have gotten from other places. So it's going to be new and interesting. And, you know, we're right here, we're close to Columbus, so we're going to go down there to Columbus to the fort. We're on the Chattahoochee. We've got everything to show them about what we have to offer as a city and to help educate them in a different way, perhaps, than they have been educated before about General Lafayette.
Lafayette's story, most would agree, is compelling, as compelling as Hamilton's. Why do you suppose there's not been a Broadway play about Lafayette?
Because you haven't had a person for whom that has hit a spark yet. I think it's all it is, because he's in Hamilton. If you look at the pictures on most sides of Lafayette, you know, tall and proud and serious, it doesn't perhaps look inviting that, oh yeah, we could do a musical around this. I think perhaps rather than a musical, there may at some point be people who do readings of some of the letters that he wrote, both to Washington and to his wife, Adrienne, and to his memoirs, where he just talked about the experiences that he had. I think there's a lot in there that could be fun. I just don't see people, I don't think people see it in that way. And for instance, he tried to have a small rebellion when he was a teenager in his school because corporal punishment was the rule of the day. And he thought that one of his classmates had been unjustly chastised and punished. And they even practiced with their swords about how they were going to have this rebellion, and nobody paid any attention to them. You know, that type of small scene, really tiny in his life, but could make an interesting small sketch as people think about, yeah, this was a person who had the same experiences that other kids of his day had, of the other aristocrats of his day had. If you were doing a musical, I'd certainly put in the fact that Marie Antoinette laughed at him because he couldn't dance. He had not been taught to dance. And it says he was a little awkward, a little bit shy, and he did not acquit himself well, and the Queen laughed at him. I think there's a lot of material there, as well as some of the more serious things of when he was in command, and he really took command, and the fact that he advocated for us in France, and though he didn't sign the treaty, without him, who knows whether that would have happened. He was an ambassador for us, and I think that's the part of the story you would also want to tell.
So you had mentioned that Lafayette spoke with Washington about the Emancipation Project, which Lafayette later pursued at Cayenne.
Mm-hmm.
Why, when Lafayette visited for 10 days in 1784 and likely discussed that with Washington, in your mind's eye, why did that idea not take root when he discussed it with Washington?
I don't think Washington was interested. The tenor of the times were that people of wealth and privilege had slaves. They were enslaved peoples, and that was part of the package, as wrong as that was. I don't think he seriously considered it. Jefferson didn't seriously consider it. And my guess is that Lafayette would not have pushed it too hard, because he did see Washington as a father figure. And, you know, you have to know at what point you stop. I personally wish he had pushed it, but you have to know at what point to stop when you're in those discussions. And I think he probably thought he had done what he could and wouldn't push it beyond that. One of the things I read that was disturbing to me, given his views on slavery, was that when he was in Fredericksburg, Virginia, he didn't know that the papers had put out a notice to the slave owners saying, keep your slaves in their pens, basically, and saying to all people of color, you are not allowed on any of these streets on this day when the parade comes through for Lafayette. He would not have approved of that. And yet that was the time. That was the way the times were in Virginia. No one else would have thought anything about it, probably, except for Lafayette and for his secretary. But so there were there were tensions, and there were different value sets at play as Lafayette was working in this country and taking his tour later on.
Mike Duncan, in his book just released last month, suggests that 2 months after Lafayette arrived in America, Edmund Bryce, who was from Annapolis, purchased for Lafayette an enslaved person. We know no other details. Would that episode affect Lafayette's stature in your mind's eye?
Had he accepted? Yes, although not with his contemporaries. It wouldn't have had any impact then, but if that was a part of his story, it would certainly have had an impact now.
On that same line, so Lafayette was married to Adrienne 34 years.
Mm-hmm.
And after she died, he never remarried. But would it affect his stature knowing that he had at least 2 extramarital encounters? How would you reconcile that in your mind's eye?
I don't think it would have affected his stature, because I think the behavior was not abnormal at the time. You know, women were certainly second place citizens, and the idea that men of affluence could play around was not anything that people would look askance at. So I think that would not have impacted him.
So Marine Major General Charles Bolden, who was head of NASA, said that children cannot be inspired unless they're informed. How do you interpret that as it relates to Lafayette?
I mean, in terms of his becoming informed, he was a great student. All of the instruction that he had in Paris and in his second institute was in Latin. But if you look at the list, and I don't dare quote some of the books, I don't trust my memory, but when I read the list of the books that he had to read and the lessons he had to learn, a lot of them from great Roman generals, he learned a lot. He retained what he learned. He understood the benefit of knowledge. One of the things he writes about is when he came to the United States, it didn't take him long to learn English. And he thought that that helped his credibility, because at the time, he wrote this, France was the language that people should speak, but he learned English and learned it well. And that held him in good stead. So I think he understood the value of education widely defined. So he had his formal learning, he learned from mentors, and then he learned from his own personal experience as an officer with absolutely no experience, who learned by trial and error and became very good at what he did.
And Lafayette's motto that he established when he was 19 was "Cor non," or "Why not?" Mm-hmm. How do you interpret that?
I actually wrote that down, and I'm going to look, because it's one of the things that I wanted to check on. It was his second motto, and it replaced the first one. His first motto for his family was "Determination is enough to overcome any obstacle," which is good, very straightforward. But "why not" says to me, I'm going to think outside the box. That expression didn't exist then, but that's in practice. I'm going to think outside the box. I'm going to talk about democracy. I'm going to talk about people's rights and religious tolerance. It hasn't happened yet, but why not? And that's what I think that was, that he had a vision that things could be different than they were.
So if you were to ask your students today to write their motto, how do you suspect in the aggregate the mottos might be different from Lafayette's?
I think the difference would be that we have, over the last decades, seemed to move more toward a "let me get mine" mentality. One that is more self-centered and self-focused. than a motto like why not leads itself to, I would be surprised. Now there are some, and I will say in our student body, we have quite a few students who really get it. They understand that it's not just about them, that it's not just about money. But overall, I don't know that we have taught students to appreciate their role in a larger community where they don't just see themselves in the center, but they see themselves perhaps as one of several spokes on a wheel that all have to work at the same time to make things really be effective. I don't know that our students see that. That's our job to teach them. We'll say if they come to us as first-year students, that's our job to help them appreciate those nuances that they perhaps have not been exposed to before.
So are you suggesting that Lafayette's story may in fact illuminate that whole point for them?
It might. If I were actually, I am not a historian, so I will never teach that course, but if I were teaching that course or having students read articles, I would pick a few articles that help them appreciate what the why not really means. Perhaps his role in the war would be where we would start, or perhaps the idea that he defied his father-in-law and actually the king and came to America and did what he was going to do. That why not? A few stories I think would help students appreciate what that actually means and might encourage them to think a little bit differently if I then said, all right, along that same vein, you give me a model that you could adopt for yourself or for your family.
So 40 years ago, Robert Coles at Harvard started a leadership class, the moral leader. Do you see that there could be a similar leadership class with Lafayette at the center?
If it were me, I would have a leadership class with 3 or 4 people at the center, because I always think there's a mistake if you automatically start out with a male as the person for whom you're going to bank everything on. I would want a man, a woman, person of color, because what we want people to see, I think, in terms of leadership, and what Coles did very well in that book, The Moral Leader, it's been a number of years since I looked at it, but I taught from that book several years ago, is the idea that leadership can come from different places. And so we shouldn't have a preconception of what a leader looks like. And that would be the message I would want to convey. We all have the ability if we're willing to commit and do the work. So it doesn't have to be an old person or a young person or a white male or a Black female. There's room for all types of leaders if people will step forward.
Lafayette had a high sloping forehead, reddish hair, a bird-beaked nose. How would you react if on stage he were portrayed by a female?
I don't think that would bother me. If you're acting, right, and you have a reenactor, it would certainly get people's attention. It would make them sit up and take notice. They might question why you did it, and I think in those settings, anything that invites further questions is probably a positive thing.
You have mentioned before that you've been interested in collecting sayings from Lafayette. Have you come upon any of late?
Not other than the why not. The other things I've been writing down are things that I just want to consider a little more later in terms of his feelings about democracy and what causes the downfall of democracy. So I'm not ready yet to have one that I would put up on the wall, but I'm still looking.
So Robert Putnam in Bowling Alone years ago said that America no longer enjoys coming down to Civic Center, that they like to be at home. How do you engage community to come into the arena and be part of telling the story?
I think you just have to invite them. I think he was right when he wrote Bowling Alone, that the times had changed. And so instead of going out and doing things socially, you could watch a movie, you could stay at home. So yes, the times have changed, but I think there's always an avenue for rich conversations if you set it up right. You have to give people a reason to come. You have to make sure that they know that if they come, that they will be able to speak their piece. I think that's the other thing. If people will assume that there is an agenda and a perspective that you are going to push, they're less likely to engage. They have to know that this really is open conversation. Let's hear each other's ideas and exchange ideas, and then you could do it. So if you do a series of engagements of that sort, and people know you're being honest, and you really want to hear what they have to say, I think people will come. And I think particularly after what we're going through with the pandemic, when it is safe to gather again, I think people will be very anxious to gather and look at each other in the face instead of as we're doing now on a screen. I think they will be anxious for that.
On that note, how do you see that the arts community can be involved in disseminating this story?
Well, there are lots of ways you could do it. For people who actually have artistic talent, then there are paintings, drawings, ceramics, all kinds of things. I like the idea of engaging young people, perhaps who are future playwrights, to writing some short sketches. You give them enough material to read that they can understand and that they can do the writing. I love the idea of having some people see if they could compose a song based again on what they know. All you need is a little bit of encouragement, and every community, if you look at Lafayette, you can see where the arts could fit in, where literature could fit in. I think you could see where political science could have a series of could contribute in that area. I think business, as you look at what works and what doesn't work, the fact that when he was on his tour, all these industries really benefited from the fact that he was on the farewell tour. And they sold out almost everywhere they went. And the interesting fact that I just found out a few days ago is that a lot of the glassware that was sold here was actually made in England, because England had thought earlier on that this was going to be a success, and they had more of the material. So in some cases, we made them here. In other cases, they were shipped here and then sold here. So, you can talk about business models and what works and what doesn't work. I don't think there is a discipline where it does not work, even in languages. The fact that he was bilingual, and that's very important for our young people now to be bilingual. I don't know that they appreciate that yet, but that's an important competency to have.
So assume some businesses would like to identify with the ideals that Lafayette represents. How would you suggest a business go about that project?
Well, we have one business that has done that already. It's Matthew Olson. Is it Cheesy Mac, I believe is the name. And he's a Lagrange College graduate, so I'm very proud of him. He's a business major. Was a business major. But he's got an item on his menu. So you might do that. You might have, in addition to a menu item, you might have little snippets of information. People don't want to read a whole lot, but little snippets of information that could go perhaps on next to the menu item to give a little bit of explanation of why it was named in that way. I think businesses are pretty creative folks. And if you give them the opportunity to say, what would you like to do to help us appreciate who Lafayette was and what he represents now in Lagrange, I think they would step forward for that.
So you mentioned the farewell tour earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So we're coming up on 2024, 2025 will be the bicentennial. How can a community, 30,000, contribute to that celebration?
I think we need to go to all the nonprofits that are here in the city, tell them what we're trying to do, and ask for their ideas. I mean, we will have ideas at the Alliance of things that we think will be very successful, but I would love to hear from Racial Trust Building or Hillside Montessori School, whose kids are involved in absolutely everything, or the Troup County School System. I think we go and we ask and we say, how do you see you might play a role? And we put our heads together and come up with the top ways that we can do that. And then we move forward with that. I think there's enough to be done that anybody who wants to be included in this ought to be able to be included.
So Dr. McMullen, it has been fascinating talking with you here. And do you have any final comments before Alex may have some questions that come in? The final comment is yours, however.
I'm appreciative of the fact that I am now involved. As I said, this is not an organization that I thought I would have wanted to get involved with, because I have always worked with traditional nonprofits, and I love my work with traditional nonprofits. But I am also working now with some historic preservation associations, and this fits in so well with that, that I'm glad I have a chance to educate myself a little bit and to get other folks on board to thinking about Lafayette and what he means to the community.
Thank you. Alex?
Agreed. Dr. McMullen, we are honored to have you. I know I 5, 6, well, I guess 10 years ago, I came to Lagrange College as a student. You were on the faculty there, and I think our paths didn't cross, but I am honored to know you now and have come to know you through our board meetings and such, and I'm looking forward to working with you in the future. Of course, I think you might have undersold yourself this evening, but you are now the new chair of the business department. And I think the business department at least is in good hands for the years to come. So I do have a few questions for you. I want to start with mine, or maybe a comment that can turn into just your own comments. So kind of open dialogue here on the issue of Lafayette and slavery. So as Dr. Ingram mentioned, this new book on Lafayette has brought mention that in 1777, Lafayette very well may have had an enslaved person either given to him or that he purchased. There's not a whole lot of, discuss record in the historical narrative as to exactly what happened, but it's been eating at me. And I have this, so to start with this, I have this portrait, this famous portrait of Washington and Lafayette meeting at Mount Vernon on the porch. And that was when they discussed slavery. And we don't know what they said, as y'all both alluded to. But I have it in my living room, and my fiance may not like it there, but that's where it is. And, I often think, what was the discussion? What was said? We know Lafayette's stance. We know what Washington did. But what did Lafayette do? And then this whole thing that the 1777 enslaved person, and then going to his comment saying, I would have never drawn my sword in the cause of America if I could conceive that thereby I was founding a land of slavery, to his experiment in Cayenne. It's tough. Here it is, a very young Lafayette being presented with an enslaved person or whatever the situation was there. But he turns his entire focus to almost outright go against his contemporaries and urge them, plead with them to do something about the hypocrisy of liberty, equality, and justice that they were creating. So I'm interested in that, and I was interested in your comments tonight about that, and just wanted to see if you had any other comments, and if not, we do have at least 2 more questions.
No, the only comment I can make is I think he may have been caught in a difficult situation.
Sure.
Where his personal values were different from the practice of the time. And at what point do you make that your final stand? As I said, I wished he had pushed it, but that's easy for me to say in this time. And I don't know those circumstances. And I just hope that we do not find that he indeed was given and accepted an enslaved person.
Well, to I guess lighten just a little bit the mood, but what food do you think best represents Lafayette?
I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know what he enjoyed eating. Sure. I know that in the courts, they ate lots of sweets and pastries. And so I would imagine something that represents some kind of sweet dessert would probably represent Lafayette. Sure. They had the dances in a big hall and everything, and they drank and they ate sweets, among other things. But that was a big part of the dining experience then.
I saw that question and wondered myself and said, between a macaroon and just lots of wine. Well, in terms of the vision that you particularly have of the Lafayette Alliance, what do you want to see the Lafayette Alliance doing and achieving in 5 to 10 years, let's say?
5 to 10 years, I would like to see us have a program beyond the special celebrations that we have, a program so that we have some way to engage with students in schools around Lafayette, programs appropriate for whatever level they are, something that we can pass on, so that if you give to a teacher a little pamphlet that speaks to a certain part of his history, that teacher can use that, year after year. I see us being considered an integral part of the organizations here, so that if someone in another organization is planning a program and they're looking for a partner, they're going to think, oh, Lafayette Alliance. It's that. I want us to be considered as central to what we do here in Lagrange.
Agreed. All right. Well, with that, I don't think we have any further questions. Dr. Ingram, Dr. McMullen, if you'd like to have the last comment, we'll do that and we'll wrap up for the evening. It's been an honor having you, Dr. McMullen, and this is being recorded, and it'll be on our website and YouTube channels and all that good stuff shortly. And
okay.
So we are glad to have you, and I'm glad to work with you. I'm looking forward to the I think today we had a meeting earlier, the 2024-2025 bicentennial, but sooner than that, the AFL 2023. I mean, they're coming.
Mm-hmm.
They're coming here to Lagrange, and we have, as you alluded to, so much to offer.
Yes.
So much to show and impress them that, just an hour south of Atlanta, this small community, we have a lot
Mm-hmm.
to show for. So
Absolutely. Well, I'll leave the last words to Dr. Ingram.
Dr. McMullen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for taking time to be with us. I enjoyed our interview.
Thank you. I did also.
all right, with that, we'll sign off. Thank you everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you soon.